Well, let's go ahead and get started. I just want to welcome Gail. Thank you so much for being here with us today. How you doing?
Another day in paradise. I'm doing great. Looking forward to the conversation.
You love it. Great to hear it. And Georgie, just wanted to welcome you to the space as well. Georgie, as I mentioned, is so talentedly wrote and interviewed Gail for our recent Meet a Farmer feature. And she's based up in Washington. So Georgie, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we are going to kick things off really shortly. And I just wanted to really quickly reflect back at the group. Looks like we have a good crew. Again, seeing people from Kansas, Portland, Oregon, everywhere, all the way over in Texas. So fun to see some friendly, familiar, and new faces. Good to have you all here with us. And just to turn the tables a little bit, like this is really important. This is a piece of this regenerative movement. And I just have gratitude for everyone for being a part of the community and being a part of the conversation. I think we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and a huge part of this work is listening. So thank you guys for being here today. We're gonna keep everyone on, yes, Deanna, we're gonna keep everyone just muted for the first part of the conversation as Georgie and Gail kind of riff and start to tease out some of the nuances of Gail's work. And then we'll shift the traction of the conversation to questions and answers about halfway or a little bit past the halfway mark. So we have an hour together for that first part of the question. So if anything comes up as they're chatting, just keep those curiosities, put them in the chat. And just wanted to introduce you all as well to Tom Robinson, who's a member of the Farmers Footprint community. He's going to help us co-moderate the session today and pull out some of those questions, as well as be sharing. He's waving. What's up, Tom? As well as be sharing some links throughout the session. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and direct those to Tom, and we will be recording the session today. So if you miss anything or you want to send it to a friend, it'll be available within the next 48 hours. And then also, I think that there will be time as well if you want to ask Gail a question directly in that Q&A, there'll be an opportunity to do that. So feel free to keep your questions in the chat, but then also when it comes time to ask questions, you can head to participants and then raise hand. There's a function in there, and we'll get going that way. Amazing. And then just one more quick little just housekeeping note on Zoom, just for a best practice there. If you go to the 3 little dots in the corner, upper right-hand corner of Gail's window, and then you click pin, that'll actually just keep his screen highlighted for you. So he'll take up the main part of the screen once we stop screen sharing the intro card. So that'll be kind of a better experience for you to understand the conversation from. So amazing. Well, if this is your first time, it looks like we have some spring chickens in the group, which is so corny, but we're rolling with it. Just to give a quick little welcome to you to the Farmers Footprint community. We are catalyzing awareness of regenerative agriculture here, and so excited to partner with farmers and land stewards and writers and educators and doctors and scientists, really to just help all be a part of this movement to create that path forward through regenerative agricultural practices. And one way that we love to do that is through storytelling. So this piece is a huge part of what we do. And you guys are the other huge piece of what we're doing. So thank you for being here as we rehumanize the human mosaic of lived experiences within this community together. Amazing. All right, cool. Well, as just a quick little introduction to Gail's work, and I think I'm actually going to pass it to Georgie to head in and talk about how Gail's making an impact in Kansas. And again, thank you, Georgie, for being a part of our writer's circle. We're so excited to be building out the diversity of voices that are sharing stories through that lens. So Georgie, please take it away.
Well, thank you. And I am so excited to be working with Farmers Footprint. It's hard to find an outlet of an organization that really wants to hear farmers' stories to the depth we need to hear them, like we have done with Gail. So it's pretty awesome. So first of all, I'm just so happy to be here talking with Gail again. It was really fun when we talked last time. It was such an honor to write your story, Gail. You're doing, just really amazing work in regenerative agriculture. So it's exciting to spread that word. I think what is so incredibly powerful about your story is your personal ability to tackle some of like the toughest issues in agriculture, just sort of head on, and you really create a space for other farmers to engage and be part of that conversation. And that's not an easy thing to do. But before we get into all that, I sort of wanted to highlight for the audience sort of the arc of your story, because it's pretty deep and long. you've got many years in it. So I wanted to sort of go through that. So I'm just going to sort of jump through sort of the major points of your story, and you can, add any if I miss any. But to let the audience know, so Gail is a third generation Kansas farmer. He grew up on a pretty diverse sort of typical Kansas family farm. They had 6 crops in rotation: cows, hogs, and chickens, the big community garden. He personally experienced the 70s agricultural boom when all the farmers were doing great, get big or get out. The farm bought all new equipment. Times were good. And then the 80s bust when all blew up. And so we lost so many farmers in the United States. And I know you mentioned your dad was lucky that he was able to take a full-time job off the farm to keep the property together. And then your dad was ready to be done with that, and you and your brother took over, splitting the property. You worked your way up to farming 3,200 acres and 2 crops, both Roundup Ready soy and corn. And in that sort of you got on this quest to stop erosion. Didn't like watching your soil blow away in the Kansas wind. So that kind of led you to starting to do no-till, which you failed at first, which actually is a common story with a lot of farmers. No-till isn't just like immediate, like try it and win. Take some work at it and figuring it out. But you kept, you stopped, and then you had the experience of introducing wheat into your rotation. That made all the difference in the world. Sort of opened your mind. You started going, what the heck is going on with the soil? I didn't know anything about this. Started bringing in the animals, all the many different cover crops. You ended up increasing your organic matter from 2% to 7%, which is, as a lifetime farmer, I was always told that's one of the hardest things to do, is increase your organic matter. So that for people that aren't farmers, I don't know how incredible that is. that's a big win. Anyways, through all that, you ended up, as a lot of no-till farmers, that happens with a lot of no-till farmers, being a heavy use of glyphosate. That ended up with a lot of resistant weeds. Started learning more about glyphosate, started realizing how dangerous it was for soil and human health. That kind of put you on a quest to try and get glyphosate out of your farm. Ended up switching to paraquat, which is arguably more dangerous. Before you, I know, yeah, but a lot of farmers are doing that right now today. And so in the midst of all this, you got, and also you were winning awards. I think you won the 2013 Soybean Conservation Award of the Year. But at the same time, you're getting in a battle with farm insurance because of your no-till conservation practices. Gail applied for a farm insurance claim during a really bad drought period, and he was denied because he had some leftover cover crop that hadn't quite died, and that was against their rules at the time. So that ended up to a lot of stress, a lot of debt. You ended up getting a lot of peer pressure from the community, losing your line of credit. And eventually in 2019, time to let go of the old property, started again with this 162 acres of this, it's the new old farm, I think that is how you described it. It's an old tired farm that you're working on restoring. So, so that kind of puts you where we're at now. And to me, this is just like an incredible lifetime experiences of situations that a lot of people, I think, in farming would have said, screw it, I'll just go work at McDonald's, it'd be a lot easier, a lot less stress. But instead, you don't seem to be anywhere near to being done. And you're sort of like in almost like this new, I guess, avenue of your life with so much excitement and enthusiasm for it. And I think that's really, to me, amazing. So I would love to ask you to share anything more about kind of where you got to this point and why are you so excited to be where you are right now? Because I think that's pretty cool in your story.
No, I think you pretty well hit all the points, and my life has been just a tad bit of a soap opera, no doubt. Plenty of highs and lows. I think one thing real quick on, when we brought the wheat into the rotation, it was the fact that I finally realized that it wasn't wheat, it was carbon. And that was the first time in my farming career I'd ever heard the word carbon used in farming. So, it's kind of an aha moment for us. And, the rest of it, you've pretty well hit. The night I realized that glyphosate was an antibiotic was probably one of the low days of my life. And it not just called into question everything I had done on my farm up until that point. It called into question my kids' and my grandkids' health and future on this planet, as well as mine and my neighbors. And it also led me to question everything I had been taught about farming, about life, to question anything that comes out of the government's mouth or industry's mouth or university's mouth, and really not just take everything for granted and believe everything I was told. So that kind of got me to where we are today, I think, or got me started anyway.
So that's great. Can you tell us sort of why you're excited to be where you're at? Like what the new vision of where you're going with, because this property, I mean, it's starting over, but it also gives you new opportunities as well.
Yeah, obviously the scary side of the new property is I don't have my 7% organic matter soil. I tried to bring that with me, but they frowned upon it. So we're on a highly degraded farm and starting over. The fun part is we can take our knowledge from the last 20 years and see how fast we can do it now in real time, show it to conventional farmers, like I said, in real time, and show them that we can do this, be profitable, and make change very rapidly, hopefully bypassing some of the mistakes and failures we had in the past go round. It's also, we're really fond of education. Lynette and I, as you know, we're hosting our 10th annual field school this fall. We're wanting to expand our education here on the new farm. I'm sitting in my 40-seat event center where we want to host some more on-farm workshops. But also, the fact that the farm is very diverse already. Just when we got here, we inherited a small operating orchard, some native rangeland, some organic cropland, a little bit of timber. So when we're talking about education or land regeneration, we can take it to several different levels of agriculture, from gardening to large-scale row crop to grassland, timber, livestock, et cetera. So kind of makes it a fun challenge. And obviously the diversity here, hopefully we always have something to eat.
Yep, at the end of the day, you have something to eat. That's what my husband used to always say to me. Well, at least we have food. That's great. And I'm going to come back to the field school a little bit towards the end and let you talk a little bit more about that. But one thing I wanted you to talk about is the peer pressure in the agricultural community. I think you and I talked about that a lot. And I think, there's a lot of people that can come up in the big ag or, the conventional ag community that don't understand sort of the real peer pressure that's sort of applied to farmers like you that sort of think outside the box and take on, and say, no, I'm not going to spray glyphosate. I'm not going to spray, for the aphid outbreak. I remember you telling me that story. I'm going to see if the ladybugs handle it. But that is really difficult as you farm, because that's not just, it's your family, it's your friends, it's your neighbors, people you've known since you're a kid, sometimes even your own spouse. So, what can you explain to us sort of like where this resistance against sort of like a regenerative, renaissance or some of these regenerative practices is coming from in sort of these areas, and what can we do to encourage more traditionally big ag farmers to look at regenerative agriculture as a real solution, to sort of like provide them, create an avenue where it's like an okay and safe place to go instead of like an out of the box and you're going to be the rebel and the strange one. Explain to our audience a little bit about that scenario of what you live in.
Yeah, sure. It's extremely difficult to explain to an urbanite how huge peer pressure in rural America is. And peer pressure on a farm makes peer pressure in 7th grade look pretty minor. And it's, the hard part is it's far reaching, it's multifaceted. A farmer, we've thought this through a lot, because especially in the early days of no-till and cover crops, I would go speak in a meeting, or myself and other farmers, and we would get a raw rounding, ovation and pats on the back. And we would drive back through that community 6 months or a year later, and those farmers are out plowing and spraying and disking, and we couldn't figure out why. And finally, it came to realize to us that, a farmer comes to a meeting, here's a great message of hope, a better way, a safer way, and quite frankly, a better way financially. But then they go home and just in this world, 99% of farmers are male. So they go home and they have dinner with the wife, and over dinner, she wants to know what they learned at the meeting that day. And, the farmer says, well, I heard this great talk and I'm going to buy $10,000 of cover crop seed and we're going to make some changes. And what is the spouse going to say to the farmer? Where are we going to get $10,000? So you've got instant pushback from the spouse. You've spent a whole day at a meeting hearing a mind-blowing presentation, and you've got 15 minutes to relay to the spouse what you learned and sum it up. And it's extremely difficult to do. And once you get past that, you then have to relay that message to your banker, to your landowner, who's probably your mother or your mother-in-law, your parents, your kids, your hired help, your agronomist, who is either your neighbor or your brother-in-law or the guy you play golf with, or your seed salesman, and pretty soon it's just easier to stay the course than it is to make change. And then you've also got the neighboring farms that the minute you start doing something a little out of the box, we've lost our sense of community in rural America. And by that, I mean, when I was a kid, when a farmer broke his leg or got in financial trouble, the neighbors all showed up with combines and tractors, and they did the work for you for a season. Today, if you plant a cover crop on a piece of land that you don't own, the neighbors are instantly calling and writing letters to that landowner, telling them that you're destroying their property and trying to rent their ground away from you. So the peer pressure is just huge. And I one example for me personally was the story that you shared about not spraying the aphids. My agronomist called me. He was a good friend of mine, and told me they were finding aphids in the south end of the county and they were going to start spraying the next day. And since we were buddies, he was going to put me at the top of the list. And that when I said no, then he says, well, there's everybody else is going to be ahead of you, and there's a chance they're going to be renting your ground from you next year if you don't save your crop. There's just peer pressure from all angles. And then obviously the pressure of having to have crop insurance and keeping the bank happy is just another level that we won't even go into here.
Yes, exactly. I used to tell people with my farm, it was a little easier because I only had 12 acres to worry about. I wasn't trying to deal with, thousands of acres and keep a profit on, smaller was in some senses easier. And I think that, on a larger scale, when you think about the finances and all the neighbors and how much land you're affecting. So that's a great, I think, thing to talk about and to let people in the broader community understand sort of what happens in rural America, and why farmers are reluctant to make these changes. It's a lot more than just convincing them of the idea. You have to convince everybody, the whole community of the idea, not just the farmer. The other thing I think that is really sort of interesting, and is another thing that people outside of urban areas don't think about, is when we talk about sort of the idea of food apartheids or sometimes, what have been called food deserts. And we think of these ideas of geographic region that typically have low income residents that don't have access to healthy, fresh foods, especially like fruits and vegetables, right? So that's an idea we've been getting a lot of discussion as we talk about food equity and nutrition, but it's usually related to urban areas, which is certainly a major issue there. But that's also, it's funny because, it's also an issue in rural communities like Kansas, where you would think, here we have this great farming state, but yet it can be really hard to find fresh, locally produced foods. And honestly, on my farm, I used to have people that would come to work with me that were oftentimes from areas like Kansas who wanted to farm. And I would oftentimes be like, well, why aren't you farming in Kansas? They're like, well, nobody's growing the sort of crops that you are. Like, there's no place, nobody's doing it. And I want to learn to grow different crops other than, corn and soy. So now I know that you and Lynette are really doing at the new farm, you're really focusing on providing food for your local community and sort of expanding that reach, that sort of regenerative principles through that avenue. But that's not easy to do, especially when you don't have, I know you're selling in Emporia, but when you don't have a large urban population to sell to, it's easier for me in the Pacific Northwest. We have Seattle and quite a few of these communities. So what are some of the barriers for farmers like you, especially in rural areas, for creating a local food network? And what sort of response are you getting to growing local food for your community when you bring them these fresh vegetables and kale? Will they eat kale in Kansas? I don't know, but so what, talk about that. What is that like? I think that's another thing that's really sort of fascinating and isn't, a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, you're spot on. And I don't live in a food desert. I live on a food farm in a Garden of Eden, but Greenwood County, which I live in, I believe it's the second largest county in Kansas. And by and large, mostly the entire county is a food desert. 30% of the county is below the poverty line, all small rural communities. Several of the small communities don't even have a grocery store or a farmer's market. So food deserts in rural America are a huge issue. How we address that is going to be difficult. Right now, our market, because it was already established when we moved here, is Kansas City, Lawrence, food areas that are well established, with being in the food movement. We're also opening up a market in Wichita. We're now 1 hour outside of Wichita, and that will become our main market going forward. But it's also Lynette and I's goal to address the food desert issues in rural America. And first of all, that's going to take some education because, most of rural America, whether they're below the poverty line or not, is under the assumption that their food supply is safe. And so first of all, you have to educate them to the dangers of the cheap food that they're now purchasing at Walmart, and why paying a farmer extra for, value added, organic, nutrient dense, why they should even be spending that food dollar, there to begin with is going to have to be the first step. And then after that, we would really like to get into some of the grade schools in the rural areas. We've got to get farming and soil and food and, hands-on activities back into the education system and get gardens back, community gardens back in these communities, either backyard gardens or community shared garden, and start with some ideas like that. But it's going to have to start with educating the people as to why the food they're getting now isn't safe to eat. And I also want to throw a couple other things out. First of all, Kansas, just a couple of stats. Kansas is #1 in the United States in percent of ground that's farmable. 90% of Kansas is in production agriculture. Yet Kansas imports 90% of its food.
Wow.
And when we're being told to feed the planet, that our job is to feed the world, and we're being told this by industry, by government, by universities, yet we can't even feed our own state. And 1 in 4 kids in Kansas is food insecure. Just the numbers in Kansas alone are mind-boggling, and the percent of cropland and specialty crops in Kansas is almost zero. So we've got some real issues here at home to address. But also, it's interesting when you use the word food desert, and I'm going to open a can of worms here probably, and we really don't need to discuss it, but just something for everybody to think about, I guess. But really, to me, the United States is a food desert, because 99% of the food that anybody is purchasing and eating coming from Walmart, Costco, any of the big box stores, that's not food. Mm-hmm. That is a food substance made with ingredients that you can't pronounce. Mm-hmm. Doesn't rot. Food rots. Food is medicine. That's not medicine. So really, if we want to talk about the big picture, the whole U.S. is a food desert.
Yeah. That's true. And the other part of this too, and I certainly experienced this in myself in selling at farmers markets in different areas. And I sold for a while in a community that is very much a Navy town. And it was much different than some of the other communities I grew in, but they didn't know how to use the food I grew. Like they had no idea how to cook it or just use it. Like They just literally, it was completely foreign to them to use fresh or whole foods. And, you know, that's
Yep.
talked about a lot, but but I think it's an interesting conversation to talk about it. It's not just the urban areas. Certainly it's a huge issue in the urban areas, but it's everywhere practically. You know, there's only maybe a few pockets of areas that it's not, you know,
Yeah.
it's like the
Yeah.
opposite, you know? Yeah. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I guess for Lynette and I and a group of us here in Kansas, we really believe that the answer going forward are regional food systems. We can't rely on 2 or 3 conglomerates to feed America or the world. I think if COVID taught us anything, it taught us that our food system is not just fragile, but it's broken. And we not only need smaller farms and more farmers, we need smaller food businesses and more food businesses. We've got a need for farmer-owned businesses where they're getting the bulk of the money instead of handing it off to the middleman, so we can get them more profitable, so they don't need as many acres. We've got to get them a bigger share of the food dollar. And when the farmer is directly involved with selling to the consumer, they suddenly become more aware of what they're doing to the food they're growing. They if they're looking their customer in the eye, that might make them think twice about putting as many toxins on it. We've been brainwashed into believing that we're growing commodities, and commodities aren't food. So who cares what all we put on it? So, I think there's multiple reasons that we need to just a complete paradigm shift in food production. And it's not just a few cover crops on the farm. This is why I talk about it's regenerating America, period. And we've got to have smaller companies. It's got to be farmer driven. And we've got to empower farmers and put them back in charge of the food system.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I'm going to skip ahead here just because I don't want to run out of time. We might come back to some of these other questions I have, but I really wanted to talk with you about the Fuller Field School a little more and let you really, really talk about that, because I think that that's another thing that's so amazing. And I see you just released your website and your keynote speakers. And when are the dates? When are the dates again, Gail? They're
September 8th and 9th in Severy, Kansas, with Nicole Masters and Sarah Keogh. So I think it's going to be another fantastic school.
Yeah, I've spoken with Nicole Masters before. She's really cool. She's a regenerative farmer that comes out of New Zealand, by the way, to for folks, but it's been based in the United States for a little while, I think. But your field school, I think what is so amazing about your field school, and I totally understand this from having gone to many conferences over the years and what they call farmer field days, where you sort of meet with some other farmers and you look at somebody's field and talk about it or whatever, but your field school is sort of this really revered, this incredible experience where farmers from all different types of agriculture. So we're talking big ag, we're talking, the guy that's running the thousands of acres in the corn and soy, no-till farmer, but you're also having the small biodynamic farmers that have, quarter acres of raised beds or that sort of thing, or whether they're conventional farmers or they're organic farmers or, permaculture farmers. They're all coming together in this sort of like, they come together to learn about regenerative principles at your field school. And that is really astounding, because a lot of times these groups in farming don't really mix. You'll have the organic farmers, or you'll have the small scale farmers, or you'll have the conventional farmers, but you don't really come together. And but you create this sort of atmosphere where they can all come together and learn from each other, which is so amazing. And also that it's really sort of a safe place for them to talk about their personal struggles in agriculture. So what do you think it is that about your, I've had people tell me it's basically just you. I don't know, you may not agree, but what do you think it is about your field school that you set it up that is so different, that allows these farmers to get together and talk to each other as, as people and learn from each other, rather than just like, well, you're a conventional farmer, I'm an organic farmer, we don't have anything to talk about, so what is it about your field school that kind of sets that up?
I think, it really wasn't anything we did per se. That we didn't sit down with a plan of creating what we did. We sat down with a plan of having a cover crop workshop, and Dr. Jill Clapperton helped me found the field school. She's a rhizophyre ecologist. she made a couple of very strong stipulations at the first field school. She goes, we're going to try to find some real food and not just serve the free donuts. This isn't a free donut meeting like we're used to in Kansas, and with some barbecue or a hamburger at lunch. And so we sourced as much local food as we could. And at that first field school, Jill did a presentation on food and health and the ties between soil microbiome and gut microbiome. And sadly, at the time, I was a 48-year-old farmer who had never heard food talked about at a farming conference before.
Yeah.
And it kind of set the tone for what was to come at the field school. And from there, just that one presentation kind of took the field school on a hard turn. And it became more of a conversation about the carbon, water, mineral cycles, energy flow, and how the soil microbiome and the human microbiome, parallel each other. And yeah, it kind of became a safe zone for farmers of all sizes and all walks of life to come. I think part of it is we talk very little about practices and we talk mostly about principles. Mm-hmm. And I think when everybody there in attendance realizes that they all have the same problems on their farms, regardless of their practices, that, then they start talking about, and they also realize their principles are the same. So then the conversation's over ideas. And, I think we've also given the speakers a lot of free rein to talk about whatever they want to talk about. Nothing's off the table at the field school. And we also really involve the attendees.
I know you're diving right into the mental health issue at the Fuller Field School this year, but I also wanted to ask you about how regenerative agriculture and sort of the whole principles behind regenerative agriculture, especially sort of how you envision it as not just, building soil, but community building, how that can open doors to conversation about farmer mental health and give farmers and farm communities like a safe place, so to speak, where they can begin to have these conversations and actually work towards addressing it. So how do we, how can regenerative agriculture and some of the principles we're talking about work to help address this issue?
Sure. And before I get too deep into that, I want to address the field school just a little bit. We made the decision to dive into mental health. We've been discussing this for over a year now, and it's way past time. But the further we looked into it, we realized, we really had opened the ultimate can of worms with mental health. And this was bigger than one or two presentations at a 2-day workshop. And talking with Nicole and Sarah and the inner circle of the team that I work with, Jessica Nad at Great Plains Regeneration and some others, we realized that we were going to have to do something a little different. And so we're adding a 3rd day this year to the field school on September 10th. Sarah Keogh is going to address mental health during the actual field school itself from a diet standpoint. But then we're going to add a 3rd day, a standalone 1-day event on September 10th. We're still working out the details, and that day will strictly be nothing but a mental health depression discussion. And part of this is, as you look at the mental health issue, not just in America, but just particularly in rural America and on the farm, there's just almost no help outside of some hotlines. And actually, there's really very few hotlines even geared towards farmers. And I have nothing against hotlines. They save lives, but at the end of the day, they end up pushing you to a hospital, which puts you on meds, and that doesn't always fix the problem. We want to get to the root of the problem of how to address mental health from a holistic standpoint, through discussion, through diet, through teamwork. We want to empower, there's just very little training in this field. And with people like agronomists or FSA or NRCS employees that deal with farmers, what happens when you pull into that barnyard and the farmer tells you he's done? Yeah. How do you answer that question? Yeah. None of us know. We've got to get some training and support, not just for those that are depressed, but for those that are working with them, living with them, symptoms and signs, and how to get them real help and make the issue better. So that's why we're going to make this a full day event. it's certainly not going to be the last. It's going to be the first of many other events. And I think we're hoping initially just to have kind of a train the trainer event to empower people to get different workshops started in their communities, either on the farm or, in offices or agencies that are working with farms, so that we all have a better understanding of how to deal with this issue. And, I think when you look at regenerative ag and the role it plays, I think for me personally, obviously stress is a huge part of this, both financial stress and just the stress of everyday life of trying to get farming done on very little margin, profit margin, if any, trying to deal with the aspect of working 15, 20 hours a day while you're missing your kids' games or, or a friend's funeral or something like that. And all those things add up. And then you also throw in the physical and mental stress of all the chemicals we're using. And the research is there of the odds of depression among white males. That research was done several years ago that handle these toxins. The likelihood of depression increases something like 80 or 90% or 80 or 90 times. So it's, there's lots of reasons we are where we are. And I think today, especially, part of why we're seeing the huge uptick in mental health issues is, most farmers in rural America today look like me. They're mid-late 50s, been in agriculture their whole life, and they're looking at this as their dad was able to survive the 80s and their grandfather was able to survive the 30s. And this isn't as bad as either of those, or so we've been told. And how can I dare lose the farm on my watch? And so we continue to plug away every day. You can't talk to anybody because, as I mentioned earlier, the peer pressure of showing weakness, your neighbors will be trying to rent your farm away from you. So you keep it all bottled up. And at the end of the day, the best option is to take a pistol out into the shed at night. And that's not the option we need. We have to get farmers to open up. That's a difficult thing to do. Sadly, farmers' greatest virtue is also their worst virtue, and that is their pride. Yeah. And, we have been taught that we don't need to show vulnerability, that we're tough guys and that we can deal with this, but it's very obvious that we can't.
Well, I think, Gail, that is exactly, you always make me cry when you talk about this. Anyways, I'm not supposed to cry when I interview people, but that's a very powerful issue, mental health in agriculture. And I think the fact that you can talk about it so honestly and openly is exactly why people, talk about the field school as a place where they can really come and talk about these issues. So I think it's incredible. And we need to talk. Oh, thank you, Jess. She's saying. Anyways, we all, got to get together and cry a little bit. It's all good. Anyways, so I think that's great. We're going to turn it right over now to the Q&A and see what questions we have coming from the story. I think you're going to take over that, or do you want me to? I haven't looked at any of the questions because I've been listening to Gail. So I don't know if you want to pull together some of those, or I'll look through them.
Yeah, Georgie, I'm happy to jump in and.
Okay, great.
Definitely. I just want to take a moment of pause too and honor you, Georgie, because that is like so the correct response. And I just love how human that was. True kudos, like that emotion is real. And I got chills, Gail, as you were speaking about that. And it's just so special to take pause in these moments and realize like it's okay not to bypass this, and it's uncomfortable to talk about it. But like, it's so, for me at least, powerful to be more aware of it. So to hear your firsthand experience of it, Gail, and to see, how it shows up, even just hearing about it for people, it can completely be emotionally triggering. So just to give everyone here the space and to know that we're in community here, and it's part of the beauty of this space is that we are holding each other in that. So just welcoming everyone to the circle, offering myself as support. And Gail, I'm sure there's some resources actually that maybe we could share around in response to this if you know a farmer who is struggling with any mental health. But just also like, let's lean on each other. We're here to do exactly that. So thank you, both of you, for bringing that in. And Georgie, that was amazing. Seriously, thank you so much. This is Georgie's first time kind of jumping in front of a live group and asking questions. And Georgie, you're a 5th generation farmer yourself, correct?
Well, my kids are, I'm 4th. So
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry about
Yeah.
that. Didn't mean to miss.
So actually, yes, in farmer like etiquette, Gail's sort of a newbie because he's only 3rd, but I suppose your kids are 4th, but if they were farming, but
Well,
yeah.
I am 3rd in Kansas. My
Oh,
parents have been chasing the genealogy, and we know there's at least one more, but they started in Missouri. So,
oh, well then, yeah.
and I'm pretty sure if you go back, there's a pretty good chance that they were probably all farmers at some point. So.
Yes, exactly. Farmers can get competitive about those sort of things. So.
Well, I love it. Honestly, this is, for me, it was such a fun. I mean, I've never farmed. I don't have that technical experience, but to know that you guys already had a conversation, and I felt like we were just peeking behind the curtains on like 2 farmers sitting on a dirt road, like leaning out, elbows on a window, just like having a conversation. So really appreciate the dynamic that you brought to this. Yeah, and let's transition. We've got some amazing questions coming in from the group. I'd love to invite everyone. Again, if you'd like to head down and ask Gail a question, unmute and get a chance to actually speak with him. I think that's one of the coolest things about these, live sessions is like, how often do we get a chance to like grab a farmer's ear and, really get your questions answered and dive in deep with him on his work and, the potential for how it can intersect with your life or your community. So just really encouraging everyone to take this opportunity. You can head to participants and then there'll be a button that says raise hands there and I'll see that come up. But in the meantime, we did have a really, and sorry, if you do ask him a question, I have some fun guardrails. So we'll try and keep it like 90 seconds or so. And if you kind of jump over, I'll pop up this cute little confetti emoji. I'm working on my moderation skills, so it's going really well. So anyways, awesome. Well, Sean's here. Sean's actually a farmer from Tipperary, Ireland, Gail. So you've got a fellow farmer across the pond. And Sean was really curious to ask you, do you think connections to nature on the surrounding farm can help with the well-being of the farmer? And he kind of, as a small example, said like seeing the wow in the small things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think we've certainly witnessed this in the last year, just across the globe with the pandemic, is losing our connection with nature has got us all a little edgy. But I think, from a farm standpoint, when you look at farming today, at least in the US and in Kansas, at the scale we're going and the size, farmers don't have that connection to nature anymore. I mean, it's sad to say, but they spend most of their day in a cab and a tractor with the GPS, and they're pushing so hard to get finished. They're not out literally rolling in the dirt. They don't stop and eat lunch under a shade tree like my father did and like I did when I was younger. We're losing our connection with nature, and that's scary to say when you live in it every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good point to bring it home. I mean, that's accessible, I think, to everyone's experience this past year, that little extra barrier to nature, it almost made you realize how much you missed it without knowing, So thank you for bringing that piece in. Another question from Sean actually about, can you speak a little bit to how important humility is in farming? Like you talked earlier about how the greatest strength of farmers is often their pride, but also can be, one of their greatest weaknesses. How does humility fit into that puzzle?
Well, I can only speak for myself, and I've always tried to be humble, but I suppose there are times, and I can certainly think of farmers off the top of my head that probably don't show much humility. And obviously that's something that's, you've got to bring to the surface at the very beginning of the conversation before you can, you've got to be pretty humble and show a lot of humility to ever just be able to open up and start the conversation with anybody. So yeah, I think it's extremely important.
I love that I think you just used the word vulnerability, and that is so, so important too. It's like goes hand in hand with vulnerability, or with humility, I mean. Awesome. Well, we've got Deanna here and she has a question for you. Deanna, I think I just asked you to unmute. Did it work? Okay, great.
Yep. Hi, I'm super excited to be able to snag this interview with you. That's awesome. I'm grateful I got the break to do it. I have a question about what needs to happen on the farming practices for regenerative practices so that farmers can make the shift to regenerative practices while still being able to be insured. Because I think that's a huge hurdle, because I think people want to interseed and they want to, put in cover crops and things like that, but the insurance bit limits most all of us. And so either you have to go under the radar or not insure certain acres, so what can we do to change that?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking, because I was kind of remiss that I didn't bring this up at the end of my very first presentation on the peer pressure, because at the end of the day, this is a large hurdle, going forward with the changes, is the risk management for the farmer. They know how to plant a seed, they know how to add chemicals and fertilizer, they know how to do all these things and do them really well. But when you start talking about trying to plant an 8-way cover crop mix or a 10-way or 20-way cover crop mix, they get intimidated and think that complicates their life, when they really don't understand. First of all, they really need to just relax and over manage, or not manage as much. But from the insurance standpoint and the risk standpoint, this is a huge issue. It's probably the number one hurdle for farmers not converting to regen today. I think, my case got a lot of changes made with RMA. It got some of the restrictions lightened on cover crops and termination. It was a first step. It wasn't enough. I know there's been some other work done. I can't really speak as an expert anymore since I no longer partake in crop insurance, but I can tell you from talking with friends that are still there, that it's still a hurdle. What I really think needs to happen, and there's a couple different avenues we can take. Number one, we probably need to get crop insurance out of the government's hands and get it privatized so that there's some competition and get farmers, I think it would be much easier to prove to private insurance companies that these practices are BMPs, and make it much easier for farmers making change. I think if farmers had, kind of like the organic transition 3-year process, if we had a regen transition process, it would certainly give farmers some confidence to take that leap. I think another thing we could look at is incentivizing the farmers. I mentioned farmer-owned cooperatives or farmer-led marketing groups that are, selling their own products instead of selling it to General Mills and ADM and Cargill and just taking whatever the market, gives the farmer at the end of the day. And we all know that's not very much, but if the farmers had more control over this, they could be incentivized to actually have to have cover crops planted in front of their corn or with their corn, or, some things like this. So I think if we can, and I think there are ways that we can find to get farmers premiums for doing these practices that can it be enough to offset insurance altogether? I don't know for sure, but I hope it can. And I think it's something that needs to be looked at and tried to figure out.
Right.
Amazing. Deanna, I didn't know how to follow up there, but all good in the hood. She's giving me a thumbs up. Yeah, Gail, I mean, aligning incentives, that's key. And yeah, what are the steps that we can take to maybe come alongside with a new system that could eventually negate everything? I mean, that is the end game. I think it's just a complex one that we're going to have to navigate and probably go around in little circles and be clumsy about it. But I love the motivation and the movement towards that. So I'd love to, I think unless anyone has any other questions or wants to raise their hand, I'd love to pass. Oh, we've got one. Cool. Hey, Vern. I'm going to ask you to unmute. I think there should be a little, okay, got it.
Oh, okay, I'm unmuted. Yes, is anyone connected to a food co-op distribution network of any sort? I've been kind of interested in setting one up in this area. I'm a water and soil commissioner for the county. And we're trying to convert the county to go sustainable. And we're going to have to start off with the food distribution system, cut this mileage down. We're going to be flooded with and inundated with population explosion in the Midwest, all of us, in coming years. And we're going to have a local supplied food system to feed everybody. No longer are we going to have food coming from 3,000 miles away. So we're trying to get a food cooperative set up, much like what's the one in Wisconsin, Organic Harvest or something like that. Anyway, you see it in the grocery stores, you see it in organic stores, things like that. And try to set up a food cooperative. Anybody connected with that know something about it or setting one up.
Where do you live at, Vern?
I'm in central Iowa, just west of Des Moines right now.
Okay, very good. And first of all, wow, a politician that sees the picture. Thank you.
Well, I used to do.
Would you run for president?
I used to live on 11 acres and I did it sustainably. So I did about 30 years of it. Nothing like having Thanksgiving with everything produced on your own farm.
Absolutely. Amen. First of all, you've got a great group there in Iowa. I'm sure you're already aware of Practical Farmers of Iowa.
I'm a founding member. I'm a founding member.
Very good. I just plugged you. How about that? The first co-op that comes to mind, there's a grain co-op in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, called Shepherd's Grain.
Yes.
Fred Fleming and Carl Coopers founded it about 10 years ago. It's been really successful at getting flour and things to market. But you're spot on. I've been in conversations with people in Kansas City about what a regional food system would look like. Because we, at the end of the day, what I'm doing is really cool. But how sustainable is it when I load up the car and drive into town once a week or once a month with 20 or 50 or 100 pounds of product? You know, that's right. That's not right. Exactly at the end of the day. And we've got to find a way to get the logistics fixed on this, though it's got a better carbon footprint. But at the same time, when you start to talk like that, pretty soon you start to sound like ADM. And,
right.
And we go right back down the same rabbit hole we've been down. So we've got to find a way to do this with a different model this time. The model we followed last time certainly didn't work out very well. So, but outside of Shepherd's Grain, I'm drawing a blank, but I know there are other co-ops out there. I know there's talk of other ones coming on.
I just happen to think of in Wisconsin, Organic Valley.
Yeah.
I think maybe you heard of it.
Yeah.
And it's started by a group of 7 farmers or whatever. And it's pretty good size right now. But if I could just get the basics of the co-op system, maybe we could instill that and do it, on a local basis. Combine our counties together, our SWCDs, and then the two again with the insurance. With the insurance, Tom Vilsack is from Iowa. He lives just down the road from me. Maybe get in there about the insurance, or for organic farmers.
I'd love. No, I was going to say I'd love to jump in here and just say I was thinking, when we're talking about these co-ops and sort of this local food scenario, which is such a great way to start moving this conversation of food communities, regenerative, building back these rural, like local food systems, regional food systems. But on the other hand, there still is, and I sometimes wonder if I certainly feel your comment, Gail, about like sort of chasing down the same path that we're at now. But I wonder if there isn't an opportunity, or what the opportunity would be to have things like regenerative flour made and available across the United States. Like I'd love to be able to go to my grocery store right now and buy a bag of regenerative flour. And there's always that opportunity, it seems like there's something like, seems like, you know, it's not like we went too far one way and now we're trying to push back the other way, but maybe there's some, you know, sweet spot in the middle where we could still have those regenerative farmers, you know, growing more larger scale, you know, grains and different things that are out into a larger market. But how do we create that? How do we create this this system for regenerative ingredients to be available for consumers? So that's another thing I'd love to have you speak to, Gail.
So, and this will be, I'll just preface this by saying this is a shameless self-promotion, but the organization Great Plains Regeneration that I helped co-found this winter is working on instances just like this.
Yeah.
How to get farmers more empowered with their marketing, how to get us a more sustainable logistics delivery system for our products to the city that's more farmer owned, just trying to empower farmers and supply a much better product to the consumers. So we're really new. We've got some things in the works, but this is right in our wheelhouse of what we're trying to do. So, and Vern, I know Iowa can be pretty ugly at times, but I know several farmers there that are just doing some fantastic stuff. So, look forward to seeing what you can get done up there, and we'd like to help any way we can.
Amazing. Thank you, Gail. Well, I'd love to be respectful of everyone's time. It looks like we are just about to wrap up. And Gail, I'd love to just ask you just in, final minute or two, if there's anything else that you'd like to share with the group or, one final message that you'd really like to imprint on them as they walk away from this session.
The clock is running. Let's get it done.
That's a great farmer sentiment. That's farmers. Everybody else talks and farmers want to do. Perfect.
Well, I think it's, we're seeing, the talk of climate change here in 2030 or 2040. Well, climate change isn't going to show up in 2030 or 2040. Climate change is here and it's affecting the way we grow food. And so when I say the clock is running, we don't have 10 years to wait to see what happens. We better start making changes now and hope we can get this ship turned. It took us 100 years to sink this ship, and we now have to try to ride it in a few months, and that's going to be difficult to do, but I think we can do it.
Yeah, I love that sentiment of hope, Gail, and I think exactly conversations like this are a piece of the puzzle. Your field school is another huge piece, so thank you for taking and really leading the charge there with some action oriented, but also still hanging with us as we talk about it and catalyze action in that way. So amazing.
Yeah,
no, please.
No, I was just going to say, I don't have any choice but to have hope. I have 3 grandkids and I want to see them have a life.
Yes, and that legacy mindset, and then their grandkids, and then plus one generation, if everyone can hold that, loosely, but also near to their heart of what are the things that we're doing now? How are they going to show up 7 generations from now, a couple hundred years from now? I think it can definitely change how you start to view the world, especially for younger folks who maybe don't have kids yet, don't have that really tangible link to the future, So thank you for bringing that up. Really appreciate it. Amazing. Well, thank you, everyone. Gail, Georgie, everyone who was here participating, and Tom for this beautiful screen share. This is what we do here, among a few other fun things, but just inviting you guys to continue connecting with the Farmers Footprint community. We are here and we are storytelling, and please support us. And this is one way that you can, by showing up and being a part of the conversation. So huge gratitude to everyone for being a part of the change. And then also, we're going to stay around for another 30 minutes. We just kind of realized that, we all watch some webinars and then take that energy, that inspiration, that curiosity, and go off into the ether. And maybe when the replay comes out 48 hours later, we send it to one friend or family member, and that's that. So just taking having a moment that everyone's been on mute. It's not like we're in person and have each other's, body language or cues to really engage in a deep conversation. And most people, unless you asked a question, haven't been able to practice sharing anything really at this point. So we'll stick around for another half hour and just everyone can come off mute. We can have a lively discussion. Gail's gonna head back to Circle 7 and keep doing what he's doing. But we can pass along any questions in the event notes afterwards. And maybe if you have time, Gail, you can help us out and answer some of those, but no pressure. And really, most importantly, Gail, huge gratitude. This is, I know you have finite amount of time and there's so many things that you could spend it on. So it truly is an honor that you're here with us today. And I want to point a spotlight at, you and your efforts, the field school that you're running, which I'm going to drop the new website for your field school really quick for everyone into the link or into the Zoom chat so that folks, you can follow along with his new field school website, which just launched this past week. And keep along and stay focused on what he's doing. And Gail, thank you for being a part of the Meet a Farmer feature as well. So I really, really appreciate your time. And just want to give you huge gratitude. So really just, I think we'll go ahead and close out the session and then we'll transition to the community roundtable. So really appreciate it, guys. Thanks for jumping in and sticking with us. And to those of you that need to jump off, feel free. And Gail, appreciate you sending you off back into the wild
of Kansas.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Gail.
Thanks, Georgie.
I'll hang out for a little bit.
Okay, wonderful. Nice. All right, so I'm gonna mess around with the settings here. So I think everyone should be able to unmute now. Deanna or Tom, actually Deanna, would you mind trying to unmute and seeing if it works? You're back? Yep. You're live? Cool.
Yeah.
So good, so good. Well, Deanna, you asked a question, but I'd love to hear from either you or really anyone else. This is, like I just said, it feels like there's, I was just so touched. I maybe would love to talk about that emotional moment to start, or if anything, really resonated with you from Gail's work, and just really like what's alive for you in this moment. Is there anything that feels important to talk about that you feel like you learned in this session, that you feel like you really want to pull the thread and start to untangle the yarn ball on a little bit further? Eric, yeah, please, by all means. Can you unmute? Will it let you?
Yes, I think so. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, we can. What's going on?
Awesome. Hi. So this is actually my first time participating in a Farmers Footprint event. So it's good to meet you all. So for a little bit of context, my mom's side of the family, it was a farming family, and we still own some properties around town that are under farm lease, under a conventional agriculture model. And so part of why I was hoping to join Farmers Footprint here was to get in touch with people that are doing regenerative agriculture and try and get connected with people in the area that would be interested in leasing some of these plots, slash like trying to like get the resources to teach the people that are currently like doing farming in the area, like how to do regenerative agriculture. So I was curious what everyone's thoughts were on like how to approach this sort of transition from, we talked a little earlier about how like, oh, if the farmer like tries to make this transition, then they're gonna be like told off to the landowner, like, hey, you can't like do that. And I was curious like how that transition looks from the other side. If you're a landowner that like wants to help farmers like make a transition over to regenerative agriculture, what was that? What does that process look like?
I can speak to this a little bit, Tori, is that all right? So in agriculture right now, Gail sort of spoke to it a little bit, but land is like a super hot commodity. It's really hard to get. I don't know if you have small acreage or larger acreage, but especially if it's, decent sized plots, it's really hard for farmers to find access to new land. Okay. And so it's sort of from that perspective, it's a quote unquote buyer's market, I get. No, what? Seller's market. Anyways, so if you're the person that owns the land, you can literally, and this is happening more and more, just go into your lease agreement and say, create principles within your lease agreement as far as the practices of how they use, and it's literally written into your lease agreement. Now, you may find a farmer that doesn't want, a farmer may not want to do that, so that might be a problem right there. But it should be like right off the bat in your lease agreement. That's not uncommon. And on the other hand, regenerative farmers are also going to landowners like you and saying, hey, we want to farm your land regeneratively, lease us your land for 5 years, and at the end of the year it's going to be more productive, your organic matter is going to be higher, your land's going to be worth essentially more, so you want us as your your tenant, right? So so you're actually in a really good place to I think you'll find, you just need to reach out sort of probably within your regenerative community. And I think a couple of people asked you where you're at. I don't know where you're at. But there's probably different people within the regenerative community that could connect you with regenerative farmers and sort of start circling out. And that's the other thing when you're leasing, well, either with farmers are looking for land or you're looking for the right farmers. It's not like you don't really put it on Craigslist. Like it's all like word of mouth, right? So you need to get connected within that regenerative farming community and find out, what farmers are doing it. Maybe that particular farmer doesn't need any more land right now, but they might know somebody else that needs it, so it's really a lot of word of mouth type stuff.
And I'll just add too that, wow, to have a landlord that is wanting regenerative practices.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
And I think what Georgie said too is so important. A longer lease agreement, because it does take time to turn the land around. And also, I don't know, the farmer that
the time frame that you're thinking, like a longer lease agreement, like 2 years, like 5 years,
or even 7.
5 years. Okay.
People.
Georgie, you're cutting out, I think.
Yep. 5 to 7. And that's because it takes time to turn that stuff around. And, first, I have a few landlords, and first, approach your tenant first with specifics. I don't know exactly which regenerative practices you're wanting to incorporate, but for us, the number one thing is absolutely no tillage. And so ask them if they're not already no-till, would they be willing to no-till, or and like some other things are no seed treatments, as that destroys the soil microbiome. So it's just a whole lot of, like, a list that you might want to get together of things that you would like to see, and then compromise. And it does, not all of those things can be done overnight, and it is a process. We are in our 7th year of regen on our grain farm in North Dakota, and so it takes time to turn it around. But thank you for being a landlord that wants to see something different. That is like
I
appreciate that. And to clarify, just in terms of relationships and who owns the land. So my mother is the landlord. She has sort of turned over a lot of the property management to me at this point. So in terms of like making decisions about like how to do weeding, or like coordinating with tenants, and like trying to. I'm still sort of new to this process. So mostly I'm trying to get connected with resources here to understand, like, is the transition going to look like, hey, do we stop leasing to a conventional farmer and instead start leasing to a regenerative farmer? Or is it more like, hey, farmer that like we're currently like working with, here's some practices that we want you to implement?
If we're going to change the food system, that has to happen. Like, as farmers, we all have to eventually transition. So do give your tenant the first right of first refusal. And maybe they haven't even
that is the plan
about incorporating some of these things. And if we're going to change the food system, everyone needs to be adopting regenerative practices, and maybe you're the push to encourage them to do that, because it's a huge thing. And Gail talked about it, about the mentality and the mental health piece of farming. And, you know, it changes a lot of things when we went from a conventional farm and under so much pressure to produce yield, and the cost of our inputs was sky high, and there was so much pressure. We were in the field all the time, all the hours, trying to get all the bushels we could to pay for these inputs and to have a return on our investment. And since adopting regenerative practices, our mental health has started to repair itself just because of the lack of stress. When we farm closer to nature, man, that changes the chemistry in our brains, change from having to push ourselves onto something that doesn't need us to working alongside something that already is functioning on its own. And so that is a huge piece of it. And I think that more farmers, when they start to transition to regenerative practices, they'll understand the difference in the whole mentality and in the pressure that is removed. It's scary. It's scary adopting regenerative practices and transitioning a farm. It's terrifying, but all of that is so worth it compared to being under, you know, the thumb of the chemical company and the fertilizer company and the seed guy and all of that. So I just wanted to add that.
Great.
Thank you.
So great, Deanna. Yeah, I mean, you got hearts and a couple claps on that one. That's just, it gave me the chills. It's so, I know your story. And for those of you who are curious to learn more about Deanna and her husband, Kelly, they went through a beautiful transition from fully conventional. All of her neighbors are still conventional, and you guys have completely transformed the land. So I'll be happy to share out that Farmside Chat that we did with y'all, and we're so lucky to do it with you guys. So thank you for that. And it also reminds me, it reminds me of, Sean, your question to Gail as well of, you know, what is getting closer as a farmer? How does that start to impact? Deanna, you just touched on that. And Sean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but it does kind of make me curious about, you know, the differences in other parts of the world. I know Sean's farming in Ireland, and there's such a force here of, you know, big ag and the chemicals and all of that. So if you wouldn't mind, Sean, I saw you come off mute. I'd love to know kind of, how is this a similar conversation in Europe or in Ireland? And do you feel that same pressure on farmers there?
Yes, there's a considerable debate in Ireland at the moment. You have a certain percentage of the farmers going into really intensive ag, and they are disregarding hedgerows, they're not giving consideration to water quality, soil organic matter. All of these things are dismissed, the pollinators. But then you have other farmers that are probably not represented by the farming agencies, and they would like to see some policy change where they can actually increase the biodiversity on their farms and maybe get some financial reward for that. And so there's kind of quite contrasting situations in Ireland at the moment. And I suppose we are waiting for the reform of the common agricultural policy in the hope that the change in policy will allow farmers a little bit more freedom to allow biodiversity, to create ponds on their farms or put in more hedgerows or native woodlands. Each at the moment will be penalized by government and EU regulations. And so there's a contradiction there. So I hope I answered your question, Tori, but that's where things are at in Ireland, and I think that's kind of the way you asked the question. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, it's interesting. It seems to parallel what Gail was saying too of the policy piece. We need to see some of the change and aligning of incentives before. I mean, what a tenuous situation, right? Like, you are expecting some of your means to come from government agencies and subsidize your income. If they're not incentivizing you to do things that end up being good for the soil, but good for the ecosystem, good for your surrounding environment. How could we, it's such an unfair ask, you know, to ask people to just go so far against the grain. So kudos to you and other regenerative farmers who have been bold and brave and brazen to blaze that trail. But I think you're absolutely right that it's interesting to see on the global scale, there's a lot of that at play, of just that policy lagging a little bit behind the needs of the farming community. Super intrigued. Did anyone else have anything that came up for them that was especially interesting or touching? Just want to hold space for that, and especially if you haven't spoken yet. I mean, it's a very like mellow crew, I would say. If you guys haven't been to our meet and greets and stuff, it's super friendly. Come off mute. We're not gonna bite. But Shayna, what's going on?
Well, I have something, but it's not specifically about what we just heard. Related, but
yeah, please.
So, okay, I just wanted to give other people the chance. Because I'll just give like a tiny bit of backstory is that a little bit ago I was like, all I wanted to do was find an apprenticeship in regenerative ranching. And I was just online, like trying to look and contacting all these different places. And then I got, somebody told me about Farmers Footprint, and now like, okay, there's so much more going on. And especially like, cause I personally have worked in domestic violence, organization and homeless shelter and everything, and am super interested in the community aspect and everything. And I'm just wondering like, cause all I wanted to do was get my foot in the door, and now I'm like, okay, maybe I need to step back and see, kind of get a better understanding of everything that's going on in that world. And just because I know there are some people in here that have like a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, just some, I guess, any like tips for kind of getting, I feel almost like I'm not really gonna know maybe where I could fit into that world until I get into that world. And then at the same time, it's like, well, if I'm not, like, I don't know where to start. So if anybody has any tips.
I'll jump in here. Is that all right, Tori? Well, my great aunt used to have a saying. It was called shit or get off the pot. So I would say this is, and I've had a lot of people come through my farm who wanted to learn more about farming and really had very little experience. There's a certain point, it's good to research and learn, but at a certain point you just have to start doing it. And that if you can find internships or apprenticeships where you can have that experience, it's so valuable to be like hands-on doing it. It's farming. You can't learn farming through watching YouTube videos. You just have to do it. And every farm is different, and every type of farming, there's so many different experiences. So I would say if that's what you're interested, if you're like, it sounds to me like you're questioning whether you should just go out and do this or whether you should learn more first. I'd say, look for opportunities, go out there and do it, and you'll continue to learn. Farmers never stop learning. Every year is learning. So it's not like, that was another thing. People would come to my farm and say, well, we'd have a crop failure or something happen. They say, but you've been doing this for 20 years. Don't you know what you're doing? No. No, there's always something new. I didn't know that. Every year I'd be like, boy, in January, I'd be like, boy, I was sure stupid last year. And after like the 15th year, you go through that whole mental process, you start to think, well, maybe there's just a lot going on here. So I think you just need to jump out and do it. And that's the people that farm are the people that continue farming, the people that have the ability to sort of roll with those punches and continue to keep going on even when things don't work out. So you just have to go out and learn and start doing it. Shit or get off the pot, as great Aunt Jeanette would say.
And where are you at? I didn't hear you say. Where are you at?
I'm in New Mexico, but I'll go anywhere. Honestly, I'm not tied here.
Yeah, it's beautiful, Shanna. I mean, my brain on it also goes to with your professional experience and your skill sets working with, families or victims of domestic abuse. I mean, we just saw a really beautiful presentation, and there needs to be more of that work going on, I think, in rural and farming communities.
Yeah.
So if that's a passion point for you, or a way that you could find like maybe part of what you do to be a piece of that slice of pie, or of the greater pie, I mean, I would say definitely reach out. It seems like Jess Nad, who was actually in the chat, I think that she jumped off, but reach out to her. She's working with Gail at Great Plains Region. Who knows, maybe you could go out for that third day of their field school in September and just observe, or be a part of it, or provide just support or help. I have no idea, but maybe there are other experiences like that too, right? I mean, just like exactly what Georgie was saying, is just like boots on the ground, figure out where you can jump in and start to make a difference for, the skill sets you bring. And that's something I love to point to for everyone, is we have folks in here who are artists and are doing art in service of the regenerative movement. It doesn't have to necessarily be farming. There's so many ways that you can take action within this space.
Thank you.
I just wanted to share something, a recent experience I've had in this, because I've been reading and studying and watching YouTubes for quite a while now. And I thought, well, I'm just going to do something while I'm waiting for land to manifest for me. And so I reached out to a regenerative farmer here in Australia on the Gold Coast that I knew was doing it. And she was so grateful for me wanting to come out a day a week. And she gave me all these projects I could do on her farm. Do you want to bring pigs? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? I'm like, wow, I thought I was just going to help. I can actually do whatever I want on her farm. So I think a lot of farmers are probably in that situation. They can't do everything they want to do, and they'd be grateful for somebody to step in.
Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you, Linda. Appreciate that. So good. Well, gorgeous. Well, I don't want to keep everyone for nothing's sake, if it feels like we're at natural pause, but just thank you guys so much. I'm super excited to host more of these conversations. We actually don't have any on the agenda at this exact moment in time, but we do have an upcoming food as medicine conversation. So that'll be on Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. Pacific, or 6 p.m. Eastern. And then, we also have a meet and greet tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning. So kind of more casual conversation. We kind of round robin introduce ourselves. If these live events feel good and nice to see other people's faces, feel free to jump into a few more. You can head to our events page to find out about them. And if not, we got the whole virtual gathering space as well. So keep it lively, share anything that's inspiring to you. I think we're all just kind of learning and growing here together. So thank you guys so much for an amazing session, great questions. And this was really nice as well. I like these community roundtables. So appreciate you guys.
Thanks.
Great.
Good to see everyone.
Thank you.
Later, guys.
Bye.
Thank you all. See ya.
Bye, Tom. Thank you.